And you will say, what? You want us to make you look good? That's not my job. Your job is to make us look good. Our job is not to make you look good, American Jews. What do you have to worry about? Your job is to make us look good. And here's how you do it. Every one of us has to serve 3 years in the Army, 2 years in the Army, some of us 5 years, and then for the rest of our lives, you have got to serve 2 or 3 years in the army of words. You've got to learn to fight the political battle, which is even more important at this point than the military battle that we are. We'll fight the military battle. We're not asking you necessarily to come and be lone soldiers, although some of you can. You've got to learn how to fight back on the campuses, how to make the arguments. Now, they keep shifting. You know, the ground keeps shifting under us. They keep changing the language. Intersectionality wasn't even a word 10 years ago. Now suddenly it's intersectionality. You've got to stay on top of it. And you know how we train for the Army? We don't train for defensive warfare. If the war against Israel ever had to be fought on Israeli soil, do I have to tell you? It's an impossibility. So it's the same thing. Don't let the war of words ever be fought about Israel's nature. Let it be fought about why you can't accept Israel, why you have to single out this tiny people. Try to find Israel on the map. It's hardly there. You know, we used to play this game, Where's Waldo? There's, where is Waldo on the map? Are you going to really tell me that this is the country you want to blame? Push them. Teach them how to defend by attacking. Teach them really what one says as in fencing. You've got to do that. You've got to make demands on them. They've got to serve for 3 years in the army of words.
Well, I cannot even start with this.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Left Reckoning, episode 20, man. We've really been on a roll. It's been such a great journey. Thanks, everyone, for joining us again. My name is David Griscom, and around these parts, we say Lula Livre, baby.
Lula Livre, yeah. I need to...
Lula Livre, I mean, that was some really incredible news. Yeah, Matt's got the apparel on that, too. Incredible, and exciting, though expected news that it seems like Lula is going to be facing off against the clown fascist Bolsonaro. We're really looking forward to being able to cover that and hopefully returning a kind of semblance of progressive government to Brazil after years and years of devastation by Bolsonaro. But we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to start in a second talking about the news about a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And then we're going to be joined by friend and comrade Brandon Sutton for his Left Reckoning appearance. And then a little bit later, we're going to be talking about the incredible victory last weekend in Chile, as well as some more devastating news about what's going on with the hyper-reactionary Texas ledge. How's it going today, Matt?
It's going very well, David. Congratulations on our 20th episode. It's gone by fast. I do want to give people a little bit of an introduction to who that was. That was Ruth Weiss. She's the Martin Peretz Professor of Yiddish Literature at Harvard. So a Harvard mindset, I think, very strong, going on for 400 years. And I thought that was interesting. She had run-ins with a guy we're fans of, Alexander Coburn, who... previously, Weiss said Palestinian Arabs are people who breed and bleed and advertise their misery. According to Alexander Coburn, Weiss is bothered by the failure of nerve of American Jewish intellectuals and their, quote, squeamishness about shootings and beatings meted out to the breeders. Well put by Coburn there. So just for people who wanted to know who we started at the top of the show with, I thought that was kind of a revealing little clip there for the type of, like, talking about the discourse with Brandon Sutton, the warp discourse of, like, my adult life, basically. It's kind of, you kind of see that there are sort of imperial ambitions behind some of that, but
oh, no doubt about it. And it's been interesting to see over this past couple of weeks as there has finally been some more significant pushback to the narrative making regarding Israel. That you could tell, like, a lot of supporters of Israel in the United States are pretty exhausted with the work of trying to deny what is very clearly going on in front of all of our eyes. It's 7 o'clock right here in Texas. And as of now, there has been a ceasefire. Let's just remember the context of all of this. At this point, the estimations of death alone is sitting around over 200 Palestinians, including 60 children, right? Remember, this is not a symmetrical conflict in any sense of the word, despite how much the Biden administration, that obviously the Netanyahu government and a lot of other apologists try to make it seem. So, as of this afternoon, the Netanyahu government accepted a recommendation from the Egyptian initiative for a ceasefire. And I wanted to note a couple things just in the early reporting. Some of the early interviews that we were seeing from people in Gaza about this were saying, we're very happy and we would like to be able to celebrate, but we're fearful that going into the ceasefire, we will be hit hard again, because in the history of this conflict, Israel has typically hit one big strike right before ceasefire goes into effect. And I just want people to understand the psychological warfare of that, right? Regardless of if this is what's happening in this case, just the fact that you can't even feel comfortable to celebrate a ceasefire after you have seen so much devastation in your country and the people around you, because you know that the people on the other side are trying to dole as much death and destruction as possible. This easily could have happened days ago if had the Biden administration not stood so strongly against any kind of a ceasefire operation. The United States consistently blocked UN resolutions to try to stop the conflict. And it's disgusting, as is the continuation of, what is it, $735 million arms deal to Israel right now. Thank God for Sanders and Tlaib and the folks who are trying to fight against it. But it doesn't look it's good that it's happening, and we should continue to support it and advocate for it. But it doesn't look like it's necessarily going to delay or stop this move, because there are so many people in Congress still with their head up their ass about this conflict that they won't be able to put up, a sizable enough of opposition. Think about people like Ro Khanna, who has been a complete coward and a slimeball when it comes to this.
Well, I mean, Israel's got a startup culture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, which was so disgusting for folks who didn't hear him say that earlier this week. And remember, though, that not only have there been so many lives lost, 17 hospitals and clinics were destroyed. The only COVID-19 clinic was destroyed. Access to water, because of the bombing campaign, around 800,000 people lost access to clean drinking water in Gaza. It's absolutely disgusting. I don't know if we wanted to play a couple of these clips, though.
Before that, I just want to say that there's this perverse way that Biden, basically offering support to Bibi this entire time, has created this as the victory, right? Like the ceasefire as a victory. And I just want to point out this tweet from Jihad Abu Salim. A ceasefire is welcome, but it isn't enough. It is time to end the blockade. It is time to fully open all of Gaza's crossings. It is time to lift restrictions on imports and exports. It is time for Palestinians in Gaza to have more than 6 hours of electricity a day. And that's I think the key point here, because obviously there should be a ceasefire. Like, obviously we shouldn't be making these these bombs deals while they're like actively committing human rights, atrocities. But besides that, like a maintenance of the status quo is also unacceptable.
No, and I think this is the big point that we want to make, and we can play this clip in a second of like the huge marches that we've seen in the United States. It has been incredible, as we talked about last week, to see the outpouring from so many people on this question. after years and years and years of silence. It's not enough, but there is certainly movement, and you can see it and you can feel it. When you're seeing rallies from Austin, Texas to Miami to Michigan to Los Angeles to New York, I can tell you right now, somebody who remembers, doing very lonely marches in Washington, D.C. as a young college student, seeing this outpouring of support for Palestinians' human rights has been incredible. Again, it's too late. Not that we can't shift the future. It's like, we needed this decades and decades ago, but we can use this momentum going forward. Do we have this first march, or do you have it as B-roll?
Yep, here it is. Yeah, and late's, I absolutely way too late, and it's insanely frustrating. But late's better than never for stuff like this.
Yes. So this is just, an incredible showing of support here, and obviously there are examples of this all around the globe, that have been really, really heartening to see. Let's just let's play this Biden clip too before we sort of zoom out for a second, because I just want people to remember just how much of an ass that Biden has been. And beyond just being rude, Biden is complicit in the deaths in Gaza. Biden is complicit in the ethnic cleansing that is continuing. Biden is complicit in all of this. The United States had from the get-go the ability to stop these atrocities from happening by pressuring Israel. And instead of that, you literally were just getting straight up support from Biden, which only emboldened people like Netanyahu and his more hardline supporters. And what he says, his talk here with what he says to Rashida Tlaib, who he continually calls Rashid.
Yeah, Rashid Wallace, sorry.
Should show people just how little he cares about this crisis.
You're getting it done. Debbie, you're and Representative Dan Kildee is a good friend. Representative Brenda Lawrence. And by the way, be careful what you say to Representative Slotkin. She knows more than you. They may be watching you.
Well, I just got to pause there. Slotkin's a former CIA agent. And I would just say former CIA agents should not be able to have elected position. I don't think. I think that the entire
we'll do cancel culture on that one.
Exactly. Like you shouldn't be allowed. Like fundamentally, that whole field, whether it needs to practically exist or not, is fundamentally opposed to democracy, right? Like the idea that you would have. Yeah. Anyway, we'll get back to Biden here, but.
Where are you? I tease her all the time. But she's a great, great, great addition to the Congress. And Rashid Tlaib, where's Rashid? I tell you what, Rashid, I want to say to you that I admire your intellect, I admire your passion, and I admire your concern for so many other people. And it's from my heart, I pray that your grandmom and family are well. I promise you I'm going to do everything to see that they are on the West Bank. You're a fighter, and God, thank you for being a fighter.
It's just so disingenuous for Biden to do that. One, look, we all know that it's Sleepy Joe and he has trouble speaking and all of that crap that they throw out there. But this is the first Palestinian American to be in Congress. In the middle of a crisis, something that should elevate this person's name in your head, right? You can't even get it right, is just so disrespectful to see. And it's even more disrespectful, in my opinion, for him to invoke her family when he has, from the beginning, had the opportunity to prevent the bloodshed and the bombings and the attacks. And he sat on his hands. In fact, he didn't even just sit on his hands. He was blocking efforts to end the violence. He was blocking, the United States was blocking efforts to stop the violence.
Affirming their right to self-defense, which is just right to continue violence.
Which is like, and the way that he talks about it here is as if like, it's some kind of natural disaster that's happening there, right? Instead of a purposeful onslaught against people, against human beings, against Rashida's family. To talk about like that is just disgusting. And I know we need to get to Brandon, but before we do, I just wanted to make one more point to people about this issue. And we're going to continue covering it because this has been obviously something that has caught everybody's attention because of the extreme violence. And as Matt said a little bit earlier, the ceasefire is not a solution, right? Going back to what it was a month ago is not a solution, right? The absence of Israeli warplanes flying over your head and dropping bombs on towers, right? Just the absence of that is not a solution to this problem. And I think it's really important that Americans in particular, but along with our friends in the UK and Canada, recognize that this is not some natural disaster, and continue donating money and trying to help people on the ground deal with the medical and human crisis of this thing. But understand that this is a political problem first and foremost. And beyond just your dollars, donating to charity and things like that, people need your outspoken support. And for you to understand that your elected officials are complicit in this system, that you need to be encouraging them to oppose the apartheid system in Israel, right? There are opportunities all around the country still to show up in solidarity rallies. This is a moment where we can be very, very outspoken and very, very present in our support of Palestinian people. And just understand that this is a political issue and not just some kind of, natural catastrophe. Because what will happen is when the bombs stop going off, people turn off the TV, right? And they say, okay, well, everything's going back to normal. Again, this situation is untenable. It is inhumane. It was a problem before Israel started their bombing campaign, and it is a problem right now. And we have the opportunity and the duty as Americans in particular to fight against this.
Yeah, do we want to quickly mention these dock workers in a shock here. Dock workers in Durban, South Africa have refused to load goods from Israel. British Fire Brigades Union refused to remove activists from roof of Israeli arms factory. Port workers in Livorno, Italy refused to load ships from Israel, all in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. And I saw also quickly with this Italian statement, Naples dock workers belonging to the Sicobas union joined the struggle against transit of weapons through our ports. I just want to skip a little bit ahead. We are unconditionally on the side of the Palestinian people against the occupation and the Zionist aggression on Gaza. We denounce the complicity of the Italian government and almost all parliamentary forces with the Israeli aggression. We denounce the Italian state's silent approval of the transit of Israeli war weaponry through our ports. Our hands won't get covered in blood to support your wars. I think that was well crafted.
That's extremely powerful. And and I think that kind of understanding is what's needed. Is these can't be sideline issues in politics for people anymore, right? The United States government actively participates in these atrocities and these horrors. So when you're talking about political action, when you're talking about who you're going to vote for, the Palestinian question is not something that you can just sort of put to the side, because it is a very active and present reality for lots of people. Right. And they win, our opponents win by making this a kind of abstract issue or something that's, this is just for some people who pay a little bit of extra attention to politics. That's something
that's why there's that repetition of it's a complicated issue.
Yes.
To which I think the Loud Boy said on Twitter, usually when I see this was Vincent Bevins, writer of the Jakarta Method. It says, usually when I have a complicated issue, I drop $4 billion worth of weapons onto one side of that issue, which is pretty much all you need to know. But yeah, that it is, because it gives people an out. It's just like when somebody says trigonometry is very complicated. It's like, well, I never bother with trigonometry then. But yeah.
No, exactly. And solidarity to all Palestinian people and free Palestine.
Yeah.
Well, before we bring on Brandon, let's just do a quick pitch here. Two quick things. One, thank you so much to all of our patrons. Please, if you've been listening to this show, consider joining us on patreon.com/leftreckoning. There's a lot of extra bonus content out there. We're putting out an extra bonus episode a week. Most recent one was our talk with Derek Davison about the Biden administration's foreign policy, or lack of it in a lot of ways. And, you also get the post game where Matt and I hang out a little bit. In tonight's post game, we're going to be watching some very, very fresh and beautiful Dave Rubin, along with taking folks' questions. Matt hasn't seen this.
I haven't even seen this yet. Somehow this passed me by. So I'm going to be watching a Rubin clip cold, which I'm excited about, I got to say.
which I'm very excited to see that as well. And then you also get you get the post games, you get the bonus episodes, you also get the weekly theory readings where I select a couple different pieces. This week we read some Ho Chi Minh along with some really interesting pieces diving into questions of like native sovereignty and things like that. So definitely consider supporting us. It means a lot to us, and we're really working right now to expand, particularly with being able to do more stuff on the ground as things start to open up again. Being able to travel around the South and the Midwest to cover labor struggles and political struggles. That's really the next big stretch goal that we have for this program. So all of that support really helps us start to lay the groundwork for that expansion. And last thing, though certainly not least, we're really excited for it. Tomorrow evening at 11 p.m. Central, midnight Eastern time, Matt and I are going to be joining the boys at the Valley Labor Report in trying to raise some money for the coal workers who are still on strike in Alabama. It's going to be a hell of a lot of fun.
It's a pretty crazy lineup. I think Tom Morello. We're on a poster with Tom Morello.
Are you kidding me? I'm pretty honored to share a bill with him, and honestly, all the folks on there are really excited.
Yeah, a lot of people.
It's going to be a good time. Matt and I will be there for a little bit of a late night recap Friday night. Probably have a couple beers. Relax,
I might bust out the Telecaster. I might be.
Oh hell yeah, dude! We should do that. That sounds like fun. Yeah, man. Y'all come out. Seriously, it's going to be a lot of fun tomorrow. We'll be broadcasting on our channel and also on the Valley Labor Report channel as well. All trying to raise funds for the strike fund of the workers who have been on strike since April 1st, I believe. So continue showing solidarity and support there. And to all the socialists out there, remember, this is really important for us, and not just because we support labor struggles in general.
It's because we support fossil fuels.
A lot of cosplay Trotskyists have been sullying our names with folks. Yeah. So it'd be a really good thing if we could show some serious material support for people on strike.
Absolutely. We'll be right back, folks, with Brandon Sutton of The Discourse at Pretty Bad Lefty. All right, folks, we are back. David Griscom, Matt Leck, joined by Brandon Sutton of The Discourse. Welcome, Brandon.
No, thank you for having me. As a long time listener, first time caller.
Tell people about The Discourse. I am curious to hear you describe it in your own words. It's one of my favorite podcasts. I think you guys do a really great job on it, and it returned recently.
It has returned. I'm apologies to all the fans, all the haters. Apologies to them too, because they keep me famous as well. I've heard The Discourse described as terrible, but usually that's in reference to like the general discourse out there. But my podcast is a sort of a light hangout news recap, social theory kind of podcast. We try to keep it light. We don't do necessarily every news story that happens each week, but we try to give a little bit of a through line across some patterns that we see week to week, intra year, obviously, just connect the dots. I think that's what we do better than most, like connect the dots. Also, like incredibly offensive jokes. Well, not incredibly offensive jokes, mildly offensive jokes.
Yeah. Don't oversell. But
I wouldn't
decently
oversell it.
Decently offensive jokes.
I keep a nice little like post-it note right next to my computer. I say this all the time with all the slurs I'm allowed to say. Just, right there.
Have there been any recent additions?
Any new slurs?
Yeah, new additions to that.
I'm watching a lot of Australian television, so actually I'm getting ready to premiere a bunch of new slurs, but it's actually kind of hard to differentiate Australian slang from like the slurs from the non-slurs.
Yeah, they kind of like their whole tone, no offense to Australians, but your tone kind of sounds slurish to me a little bit.
That's a little offensive, Matt. I was just speaking about the nuances of slang.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll back off a little bit of my attack on Australia for now. But let's move on to one of the topics at hand, the CDC and mask. What's the discourse on masks, in your opinion, Brandon? I mean, I'll just say up top, I agree with a lot of the points made in your most recent episode of the discourse, which is, I'm still going to take masks, for instance, serious in certain situations because you can, like the Yankees show, and you can still catch the stuff and transmit it. The main problem I have with it, though, is it turns everyone sort of into police, and which is I think it's good to police mask usage for obvious public health reasons, but you're focusing on other people and not like what the government should be doing, for instance, to slow the spread and care for people. So anyway, what's your take on the state of the discourse now that it's mask off with the CDC?
Is it mask off with the CDC? Because it was mask off with the CDC when we recorded that episode, and then like the day after, they were like, "Whoa, let's not rush to rip your mask right off," like we said yesterday. And that to me seems like the general state of the discourse around like personal responsibility type actions that individuals, like you were saying, are supposed to take. There's kind of this like assertion that things are safe for people, and then just kind of rush to really, really define what they mean by safe. And that is true. That's the nature of epidemiology. Like the fact that we might see a percentage of people die, due to the flu every year, whether that percentage is higher than average or lower than average depends on various factors, is just a truth of like nature. And ultimately, we can't necessarily control that unless we get rid of all diseases. But that's not really what we're talking about, I think. I think we're talking about rush, in my opinion, by people, like you said, to get the cogs of capitalism moving back again. We got to get kids back to school, and now that kids are back to school, we got to get their parents back to work, and you got to make sure that unemployment is not extended for too much longer, because people got to people can't expect to just be allowed to live without working, right? And I think to your point, I agree. Whether it's wearing the mask or getting the vaccine or any number of things that people were, chastising other people for, their neighbors, their friends, strangers online during the pandemic, a lot of that just seems like cope. Because ultimately speaking, there's only so much you can do to actually, I don't want to say prevent forest fires, because that's just like a terrible joke, but there's only so much you can do to actually, preserve public health, just like there's only so much you can do to actually stop pollution. There's only so much you can do to, et cetera, thing that we need to be working on that we're not working on. And the reason why is because you can only really control yourself and the people maybe you're directly responsible for, while the government is a top-down hierarchy that's able to, like, through social programs, incentivize good behavior in people through, incentives, like positive incentives as opposed to negative incentives like punitive measures, fines, taxes, etc., which is what we're good at. And they just don't work. Right. And they simply don't work because we just lack the support for a lot of people to be able to make the right decisions. And we're unable to really get to the heart of that matter. And so I think that we are just sent on these fool's errands about, controlling whether other people wear masks, whether other people close their mouth when they cough, whether people wash their hands. And it's meant to distract from the fact that these are all just like irrational ways in which we cope with just how ineffective our government is at providing us with support.
Yeah, it's just so easy for it to get channeled into misanthropy. Like with South Dakota, for instance, right? Like Dakotas have a huge problem with mask wearing, absolutely, and it killed people, definitely. But the problem with the Dakotas also was that they were like, oh, we're just going to do a massive motorcycle rally and have just thousands of people descend onto Sturgis and then disperse into the rest of the country. And so it caused outbreaks in the Dakotas. So like that was a governor decision. That wasn't like, and that's why like South Dakota of like not really populated states has, it wasn't the worst in mask. It was just, egregious about these decisions. But I don't know if you have anything to say about this, David.
Oh, I was just saying, since the announcement has come out, but even before then, when people were saying things like, it's pretty safe to be outside without a mask. One thing that was been really disappointing for me to see is just how anti-human a lot of people have become, or at least feel comfortable being publicly, right? When they say things like everyone else is disgusting. I don't trust people because they're slobs and nasty. And every time I go outside, I'm like frightened for my life. And it's like, obviously this is a pandemic. We all have to show solidarity with each other by wearing our masks and taking care of one another. But I do think that there's a lot of people after a year of this have really developed some really nasty kind of like anti-human perspectives that I don't think should be celebrated. And I actually think, we need to start to be more comfortable challenging, right? Because it's something that might be beneficial in the sense of like, okay, well, this person certainly is not going to spread because they're going to be covering everything up every time they leave the house. But it's not necessarily a good thing for people to be walking around in complete fear of their neighbors and people in their community or town.
Well, absolutely, David. I agree with that. And I think, no one wants to stoke paranoia except for me sometimes for fun. But this is not one of those cases, right? Because it's serious. It's not like the, talking about the earth being flat or aliens. The reality is, I think that largely what we're talking about is trying to like deal with all of these, deeply internalized, deeply socialized issues that Americans have, like culturally speaking, with individualism, with, like this sort of deep selfishness that's disguised as individualism, really, this kind of deep anti-socialness that's disguised as self-sufficiency, and how that is just like antithetical to the construction of a real public health and a real like healthy public body. It just becomes impossible to explain to people, I think, the logic of wearing a mask within the logic of American exceptionalism, within the logic of American individualism. That's why so many people died here, because there's just something uniquely, unique about Americans, like people were saying, that makes us, despite being, other countries being capitalist, that makes us uniquely anti our neighbors. And maybe it has to do with the fact that we do have a much more diverse population, and we've had an inborn, minority population in this country for a lot longer than some other European states. So like there's just a level of social cohesion that they can have, and that they're being challenged on now with the influx of Muslims from Africa and Northern Africans, etc. But that we've been dealing with for 200 years, or not dealing with 200 years, that's been subverting our ability to have a strong, cohesive public body in a way that would allow, a pandemic to even make sense. Like, how do you explain to people that they need to wear a mask when most people don't even want to, discuss with their neighbors the possibility that maybe the person who's running the country or running their local city council doesn't have their best interests at heart? Like, we're taught to be very adversarial to each other to prevent that kind of solidarity. And then, just from a very biological sense, it just means we can't agree to like not pollute the environment, can't agree to not like cough in each other's face, can't agree to not like litter or run each other over with cars. It's just, it's the reality of American culture.
I think one of the, like another example of that too is just like the failure of like our public health system in the sense is like, okay, one, there's a lot of misinformation up front, right? And people got, very confused. And then of course, America's culture wars are just so advanced that this like technique to stop the spread of the violence immediately became a Republican Democrat thing in a way that's really tragic, but it's also very funny to see. But like, look, I mean, I was saying this the other day on Twitter. It's like, I do politics, I pay attention to politics for a living. I'm very tuned in. I don't have health insurance. And I still got nervous when I was trying to sign up for my vaccine appointment when it asked me for my insurance card, right? Because I don't trust the American healthcare system to not burn me. I knew better, but I'm just saying, like, I had that first gut reaction when it's like, oh man, am I going to get screwed when I go in there and get billed for something? Obviously, it wasn't the case, and it's not the case for anybody listening. But I'm just saying, like, that was my experience, and I follow these things really closely. The breakdown of our relationship to health in this country is so crazy, and it's tied to the fact that we have a for-profit private healthcare system that creates all of these insane impediments to just providing basic care to folks.
No, definitely. And I mean, honestly, I can't imagine that in this country, there were people at the beginning of the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, who right now, who are, maybe they can now afford healthcare. Let's say best case scenario, they can afford healthcare, they have health insurance, but through decades or years of being underinsured, working through bad insurance, they just have a very unhealthy relationship with the idea of going to the doctor, right? I think that, you're talking about wanting to convince people, let's say use the vaccine, for example, that like a government who insists that you can't have anything for free ever, no matter how much you need it. It's your insulin, it's your baby's formula, it's your, goddamn heat. You can't have anything for free. Suddenly they want to give you a free vaccine. And obviously we know the reason why, because they want your ass to go back to work. There's money to be made injecting you with this vaccine. There's money to be made for it working. There's money for it to be made to get you in those booster shots, transporting and all other stuff. That's where all that breakdown happens, because we have no infrastructure there either. But, there's like, they want to get you back to work, but the people don't trust that either here. I can imagine. I can't imagine how many people it's probably not a significant amount, like maybe, but who knows? I haven't done the study, who are just thinking like, free vaccine. That's suspicious.
Yeah, is Talladega? Where's Talladega? Is that Alabama? David, do you know where Talladega is? The Speedway? I'm not a NASCAR guy, but anyway.
Isn't Talladega in like Florida?
Maybe I should look this up. But anyway, you can bomb around Talladega in your like Honda Accord and get the vaccine. And like to Brandon's point, how does that not make you suspicious? Alabama, right? Like, how does that not like this seems very sus. I've always wanted to take my F-150 around this oval, and now you're letting me. But I have to like get this shot. It's very it's not very like something you're used to here.
It's not it's not America as we're told it is. It's America as it actually is. We definitely if people need a vaccine, we'll give it to them because you got to go back to work. 100%. Right. That's what makes me less suspicious about it. I'm like, no, they definitely need people to go back to work. If this was just like a free vaccine to make you live healthier, I would not get it. Like those microchips, like they're actually trying to put into your head, but that people are desperate to get, which is weird to me. Like Elon Musk microchips, I would definitely not trust him to make them.
His currency recommendations worked out so well.
But I mean, I think this speaks to the fact that, like, this idea, although haphazard as it is, unsupported, sort of anecdotal as it is, I think, ultimately, we're speaking to broadly this sort of gap in this gap in not only the imagination of Americans when it comes to like trying to solve these kinds of problems through new infrastructure, through new sort of like social techniques, not just technological solutions, like a vaccine that we can't even get to people half the time before it expires. We are uniquely unsuited to that part of this. And I think that's where the rest of the world kind of excelled, except for a few places that are desperately trying to be like America. And, we kind of put all our eggs in the basket into like the once we get this injection, we're going to be fine, because that's just much, that's a much easier thing for Americans to conceptualize. It's a much easier, bar to reach after we fail to flatten the curve. And I think that we see, us falling back on this like heavy tech solution to these problems all the time. People lean on the idea of, a little bit less than they used to, of like cop my God, body cams as the, the ultimate solution to police brutality. And of course, we're a few years from that, like I said, when that idea was supposed to be what it takes. But, obviously we've seen it doesn't work. And now, we're dealing with people trying to use AI technology as the new bastion to make like this anti-racist policing. And that's not going to work either. It's going to be just as racist or not, if not more racist, infinitely times more racism than the human brain is possible of calculating.
Times 10.
Yeah, because we just have this, I think, this underlying lack of knowledge about science, about like how society functions healthily that, I would say benefits the rich and the majority of the 1%.
Yeah,
most of the time. But when you actually have a big problem like this that requires a level of understanding in your populace, and not having like a 25% of your population to be extremely aggressively anti-science, then of course it's not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that has driven me crazy more than any like Republican shit. It's the messages Americans are hearing about COVID throughout this entire thing are coming from like the cable company that's like in New York. It's like, here's the things you can do. Wash your hands, which from a year ago we knew it wasn't droplet based and it was aerosol.
Yeah.
So like that didn't even matter. That was just theater. Like all these and keep your distance and all this stuff, which is and like a functioning country would be like, oh, if you think you're sick, stay there. We'll bring you a test. We'll give you some food if you need to quarantine. Like that's what needed to happen. And we wonder why we're so dumb when like the main messages we get from this are all like wash your hands and spray down your groceries.
People need to wash their hands. People weren't washing their hands.
Yeah.
Because, that's like a thing. I remember before that wash your hands thing happened, there was that like whole rant on Twitter by that woman. I don't know if it's the one who runs Wonket or Quillette, but like someone who runs some magazine was like in a bathroom and didn't wash her hands. And someone was just like, hey, ma'am, you need to wash your hands. And then she melted down on Twitter about how people were in her business. And like, I think Americans have an irrational attachment to like a level of, faux self-sufficiency that is simply meant to prevent them from asking for, another slice of bread in the bread line that is America, the country. I don't really begrudge people for wanting to go back outside, especially without a mask. Cause like, who wants to wear shit on your face? I kind of don't mind because, I don't ever clean up my facial hair, but it is what it is. Because like all America has for the people who do have a little bit of money in their pocket is distractions. Like if you can't go to restaurants or to ball games or to like, whatever fucking thing is going on outside. No offense. Sorry. Excuse my language. I don't know if this is like,
you can do whatever
you can't curse. Like, what else are you going to do here? Like, I mean, I don't really like going outside, but like the majority of things people do in this country are service-based in the sense that they require people to be there to serve them in a service capacity, like a mini lord or fiefdom. So like everyone wants to go back to bars. Everyone wants to go back to like places that require, a staff to wait on you, especially in cities like New York City, where it's just like, I pay all this money to be here. And if I can't enjoy the amenities, part of which is like this, population of people who did not make it to like the middle brow tech world that, I'm in, what's the point of being here? I certainly don't feel like I'm succeeding if I'm stuck at home and I can't like actually go out to like this rooftop bar.
I mean, I hear you. I would just, also add that I think one thing that was really devastating, I mean, we're talking about like it's over, but, one thing that was, which is not, but like one thing that was,
a lot of people talking like it's over.
I mean, I will say like here in Texas, it's like, it feels very done. I mean, people still wear masks, and that's a whole other thing to maybe talk about later, how it becomes a symbol, which is like very frustrating here, which like, because this is a place where it's not like New York, where people like generally everybody's like a Democrat, like diehard, right? Like here you have a little bit more. I mean, Austin's like a pretty democratic city, but you have people coming from all over, right? And it is a little annoying here because like every place you go to now, it's like you are like signaling to everyone else, like, are you left or are you right? Right. Which is just, it's a small thing to be annoyed about, but I'm just saying like socially, it's very,
I agree with you. I think that's right. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, that's like a whole other thing. Like, but what I wanted to say is like one thing that has been really devastating about this whole thing has been like, people have really, their social circles have shrunk, social spaces are disappearing. And one of the points that I always try to remind people is that neoliberalism for a very long time has been trying to destroy the social and destroy the public space, right? Especially free public space, right? And I think Anton Yeager had one of the best pieces very early on. It was in Damage magazine, like very early on in the pandemic, where he was making the point that this is almost like the perfect neoliberal like disease, right? Because it keeps like the upper middle class at home, and you just consume, you order things on Amazon, you get delivery, right? You have no risk of going out in social spaces where you can maybe talk about your problems. And it's all obviously predicated on a unseen, underpaid, and extremely at risk, underclass of folks who are couriering people's packages and doing the labor that's necessary to keep society functioning, right? So we have to figure out a way on the other side of this to challenge that devastation that has happened to the public space too.
I absolutely agree. And I mean, I would only add to your point too, that it also privileges a very specific kind of middle class worker that is like definitely unique to the millennial, like startup tech space. There are just only some jobs that you can actually functionally do digital. Like, I mean, it seems silly, but there are construction workers, right? And there are construction workers who make a lot of money. There are plumbers who make a lot of money. They're middle class. These are not like, these are upper middle class jobs if you've been, if you're unionized, et cetera. And they really can't be done, remotely from your home. And in America, it's not as though like you can make $120,000 a year as a welder or whatever, and you could be self-sufficient for another year or two if you have kids, because like we know what bills are like here. So I think it also privileges a specific kind of worker, and it, like you said, it segments or further like reifies or like pathologizes, rather, I guess is the word I'm looking for. This new wave of like neo serfdom that we have, especially in like tech centers like New York and Seattle, where you have this kind of core, 10% of people, maybe less or shrinking, who knows how many people are even employed by like the Wall Streets and sort of like startup culture here. And then you have like this entire group of people who came to the city expecting jobs like that, maybe after college or just because wherever they're from, they don't have jobs. And they're either shuttled into like service jobs, like gig economy jobs, like Uber or whatever, or they end up in other sort of like administrative or service roles like teacher or like, secretary, people who facilitate the lives of this sort of core tech population. And I think that, we're seeing this kind of, like you said, segmenting becoming more and more stratified, like people who can afford to work from home, people who can't. Right. And I think that privileges a little bit more the Democrat side, because that tends to be more of the Democrats like bread and butter, like base of people who just like donate to them. But I don't think it's sustainable for the reason that, kind of like you said a little bit earlier. Like, I don't know if this is new because I'm not that old and I definitely don't pay attention very well, but it seems more and more that like I said, these symbols, these narratives that are coming out around coronavirus, around like whatever's going on this week, are more and more detethered from any semblance of reality. Even like symbols are supposed to reference something theoretically. And now it seems like they only really reference a kind of allegiance to these two parties that are meant to stand in for all of these other things that like are just entirely scripted and they just cannot work. And ultimately speaking, when you come to a point where it's like, well, I'm wearing my mask to be a symbol of good, or I'm not wearing it to be a symbol of bad, I think you've missed the point that, we can't have the kind of patchwork response to COVID that we kind of have the gun violence, where like some states have mask laws and some states require vaccinations and others don't, and then that's just how we live from now on. And then like the states that don't require vaccinations, they're just further proof of your morality as living in a state that does require it. It's like that's all fine and good, and I'm sure you feel all well, but you're going to probably die of some weird variant then, and like it's just not functional. Like we've I think we've hit the point where like we're so used to these narratives being detethered from any reality that we don't realize that no, actually some things will just kill you, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you feel about that.
Yeah, well, because we have other things we wanted to get to too, something that I think will also make the audience love us very much for our opinions on.
This live? Holy shit!
It is live. Yeah.
No, frankly, I feel sorry for, if this is live, I'm sorry for rambling. It's a little late. The guys got me out past my bedtime.
Well, also you're distracted by Eurovision, as I recall.
Eurovision's over now.
Oh yeah.
Semifinal 2 went way better than semifinal 1. Semifinal 1, a lot of political choices. I don't want to put our name Israel, but like a lot of just wholesale robbery. But no, but please don't get me started on Eurovision. We'll be going all night.
Hell yeah, man. Well, this is one thing. I remember I've been a guest on your show a couple years ago. We talked about the Supreme Court and how we both really, really don't like it. And I was happy to have you on this week to sort of have another conversation on it, because this same stupid problem is rearing its ugly head again with Stephen Breyer, who is now saying that he doesn't want to retire, even after seeing what happened with Trump and how devastating that is for like the legacy of the court and all this stuff. He said this line, and I want to hear your thoughts about it. And we also have a really great defense of the Supreme Court in CNN that we might read a little bit from in a second. But this is what Stephen Breyer said. If the public sees judges as politicians in robes, its confidence in the courts and in the rule of law itself can only diminish, diminishing the court's power.
Yes,
which
good.
Which is like one, yes, I want to diminish the court's power. And two, I'm sorry, I don't understand how you can be sitting here in 2021 and to not recognize that SCOTUS is a political organization, right? And that these people very much are associated with political parties and political ideologies. It's just amazing to me for somebody to be arguing about that so bluntly, especially somebody in the liberal camp, which had gotten beaten so badly by refusal of Ruth Gator Jesus Christ.
Ruth Gator Binsberg.
To not retire and, giving Trump more and more opportunities to put through reactionaries in the Supreme Court.
This is the thing I think that gives me the least amount of hope for Democrats. If I'm just like sort of taking off my personal feelings hat and putting on my like agnostic thinking cap, because it's the thing that they harp on the most. I mean, Democrats voters, like
they love
faith that they'll actually see the light, because this is the thing that they harp on the most about, like strategy and thinking, and like, they're doing some sort of like, mental jujitsu, forgetting the fact that they basically abandoned like the Congress to Republicans. They've abandoned all that shit to Republicans. Like they think they got you when they say, well, if you don't vote for Democrats, like they're gonna, we're gonna lose the Supreme Court.
We're gonna lose the court.
We've already lost the court. They've forgotten that. I don't know how you forget that we've lost the court.
Gonna lose it more.
But I mean, definitely you can always lose it more, right? But it seems, well, I guess until there's all 9 Republicans, but it seems as though like when they talk about this, they totally forget that there's a second layer of strategy involved, which is that the Democrats have to sort of follow through on their like literal strategy of like making these choices matter, right? And they don't do that. And that's the kind of thing that like when it comes to like, their promises to pass laws and their promises to do all this and that, like people have already accepted that they cannot do that for some reason. I don't know how you can accept that. But the Supreme Court, like that's their whole platform at this point. That is like, we can gussy it up with all these other things, but their whole platform is like, if you don't vote for us, we're going to lose the judiciary, and that's going to be the end of America. And then, once they're empowered, no one ever seems to actually make moves to ensure that. They never nominate young judges. Republicans always nominate younger judges than they do. They want to nominate 90-year-olds to the judiciary. They want to nominate the oldest woman in the world to judiciary to make sure like people see how woke they are. And it just seems like the most obvious scam in the world. It seems like the most obvious con in the world. But I think, now that I'm talking about it out loud, I think it just appeals to a certain level of Democratic voter that is this upwardly mobile, like kind of selfish person who like, yeah, they think that you should do the greater good because that's what they, think.
It's West Wing mindset.
Yeah, but that professional advancement, making your name in the professional world, is that not really the most important thing? And shouldn't we all be forced to sacrifice for this idea of like one upwardly mobile liberal? Because that's just like, that's very flattering to the Hamilton list. That's the plot of Hamilton, basically. Yeah. That's the Hamilton fans. Like that's very flattering to the very specific slice of, media consumers who are also happen to be media writers. Like they're writing like, I've had Kamala Harris kind of fucked over the Black community, but isn't it important that she was able to advance career-wise? Because ultimately, don't I want to one day be the first blank, blank head of New York Times, blank head editor of blank? And it's just like, yeah, like this competition that exists within these communities allows it to be very easy for them to just like throw away any real strategy for like this craven idea of advancement.
Well, it's, like there's a couple of things. There's like one, if I was more conspiratorial, you would think that the Democratic Party essentially is just going to bungle again, how to tactically deal with the Supreme Court, because it's a great browbeater to use in the next election when they put up some kind of uncharismatic neoliberal moron, to get people to say, oh, well, you have to support or else you'll lose the Supreme Court. But I actually don't think it's like a grand conspiracy that's like emanating from like the Democratic Party itself. I think it really does come from like an ideological deficiency of not understanding power, which is why liberals are so attached to it, right? Like the Republicans understand, McConnell's like, okay, we're just not going to let Obama put in, even have a hearing, right? And then we're also going to force in two super, super conservative judges when we have the ability to. While Democrats still cling on to this idea that, oh, well, the court is very sacred. And it is nonpartisan, and we don't want to make the court political because that would ruin our system of government. Instead of understanding the only reason the Supreme Court matters in this way is because it is functionally, for a few centuries now, has been a political organization, something that was taken by the Supreme Court too. This isn't something that's in the Constitution. The Supreme Court asserted its power, and Democrats continue to refuse to recognize that power dynamic, while Republicans are very, very good at, wearing the clothes and talking the talk. And then think about Bush v. Gore, right? They said basically, when they made that rule in there, never cite this, right? Don't cite this ruling as precedent, right? Which should just show you that they're using this very clearly, for political advantage. But on the Democrat side, it's like, oh, well, these are sacred institutions. We should never politicize them, taint them.
Well, they say that, and I don't know how much they believe that, because it's never so much about, you can never believe what people say they believe, in my opinion. But I do think also there is a level of difference between the Republican Democrats that just comes down to, like you said, what their goals are. The Republicans are about consolidating power because it enriches them and, and it's sort of like closest circle of donors, and they are willing to speak to the bottom rung of society as much as they have to like get them to like re-examine their goals and put them in line with the top 1%. The Democratic Party, they are trying to have a similar party of landlords and tenants that the Republicans have in that situation. But they've stripped out the combining factor of like racism and xenophobia, at least in like the sort of like the explicit level. And they're trying to replace it with this sort of kumbaya nonsense, right? And it's all meant to disguise what is essentially a Ponzi scheme, because more so than staying in power as a party, Democratic Party, I think, and it's, kind of, I think, goes to the Supreme Court too, but a lot of their appointments, a lot of like their job decisions, they're about personal advancement. They're very much about like setting their friends up and their cousins up and their nephews up. Like they've been trying to get Rahm Emanuel a job for weeks. Like, why do that? No one likes him. It's just like, as a political party, like constantly putting people that no one likes, that people are always complaining about, that their own constituency do not like them in positions of power just because they know somebody or they did you a favor like a year ago. Like that to me doesn't speak to winners mentality. That speaks to like a lot of losers mentality. But I think, again, that speaks to like that kind of like self-dealing nepotism that is very, very, coddled and excused within the sort of liberal upper middle class spaces, the sort of like Rory Gilmore spaces, where it's like, yeah, I got a job through my friend, but that doesn't mean I'm not qualified. That doesn't mean I'm not supposed to be, the head consultant for the John Ossoff campaign, in Georgia. That's even if I've never won anything in my whole life. A lot of that speaks to where the Democrats fail. Republicans, they play dirty, but I think sometimes they're just also a lot more willing to just cut their nose off if they, cut their right hand off if it offends them, right? It's like, okay, well, if we got to throw someone under the bus, you'll never hear us say the name again, except for when we fundraise off that MFer on the sidelines. Like Mitch McConnell barely wants to say Trump's name, but I bet he'll send out those campaign fundraisers. Like, the Democrats are just willing to like chain themselves to losers in a way that like I can't understand. Other than like they just like them.
Yeah, I mean it's a completely like the whole thing about politicizing the court, which disempowers it, implies like the court's above politics, right? Which is fundamentally our problem here. And and I just want to bring up kind of related, not related to the Supreme Court particularly, but the Democrats are talking now about how they can't get the Republicans to agree on agree with them for Dreamers. Without wanting to completely get rid of asylum, for instance. And the Democrats at this point, like on how many issues do we need to see this where they're not a good faith negotiating partner? Democrats just need to get rid of the filibuster and start passing things. And they should use these moments. This is a bit of a different topic, but use this moment to signal let me just play this Tim Ryan thing because this is about.
Oh, this is so good. Wait, before you no play, and I'll say that after.
Because this is it's like waiting for bipartisanship, and this is specific to the January 6th thing, and it's like these are actually opportunities to break with this bullshit dream we're inflicting on ourselves as like a political party as Democrats, whatever, right? And obviously they don't want to take it. They want to stay in the dream because I guess the dream is better for fundraising. I don't know. Here's Tim Ryan. You guys will hear this. You won't be able to see it.
I want to thank the gentleman from New York and the other Republicans who are supporting this and thank them for their bipartisanship. To the other 90% of our friends on the other side of the aisle, holy cow. Incoherence. No idea what you're talking about. Benghazi, you guys chased the former Secretary of State all over the country, spent millions of dollars. We have people scaling the Capitol, hitting the Capitol Police with lead pipes across the head, and we can't get bipartisanship. What else has to happen in this country? Cops. This is a slap in the face to every rank and file cop in the United States.
If only, literally and figuratively, it were.
I would just like to say, among the 343 people arrested, 43 were either military or first responders, and 10 cops specifically have been charged or punished for January 6th. So
yeah, they got to slap themselves.
Yeah, this is like getting upset at a climate scientist who's just clearly funded by the American enterprise and just like, come on, agree with us. Look at the science with us. And no, the whole reason those people stormed the Capitol wasn't because we have a deficiency in the national security state. It's because their party was lying to them about the election being stolen. That's not a security problem. That's a political one.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think that ultimately speaking, like the Democrats have set themselves a impossible bar. And like David said, I am conspiratorial, but I don't think that this is like an actual conspiracy. I think it's like a fallacy of liberal ideology where they have to have their enemies agree with them in order to want to move forward. Like a lot of times you will hear people say that they need like consensus in order to move forward anything. Like that the majority of people have to believe that the police are bad for you to get changed. I don't know why anyone would believe that in this country, other than like the Democrats have consistently pushed that as this sort of like bar that is set for any kind of progress to happen. And it just has never been true in this country. And so I think, sometimes that's done to avoid making any real decisions, but sometimes you have like the inmates running the asylum, and eventually people who actually believe that stuff get into positions of power, and it just becomes an impossible mix mash of true believers and grifters. In any con institution, it's just a bunch of grifters, a bunch of true believers, and everyone's on edge because no one knows who's who. And ultimately speaking, I think it's had a negative effect on how people, the imagination of Americans when it comes to social change, because like they just think that there is an impossible bar of I guess 60% majority, 51% majority that they have to reach, that they've also been told is impossible because 50+% of the country just happens to be to the right, which is also not true. Right. So it's like, it's a dual-sided attack to keep people who may or may not have good impulses politically from thinking that they can affect real change with just a handful of people.
I just wanted to, before it gets lost to history, remind folks that David Lynch endorsed Tim Ryan. And probably one of the strangest political alliances ever. And it's because Tim Ryan likes to meditate. So David Lynch is like, that's the kind of spiritual change that we need in this country.
I would not have guessed that about Tim Ryan.
Practically Lynchian, in its strangeness.
It's pretty.
I just remember, was he crying Ryan? Was he the one who said that Bernie should stop yelling? I mean, a lot of people said that.
I think he did say something like that. Yeah, and he also like donates a lot because David Lynch has like a very funny like charity. For transcendental meditation. I think Tim Ryan's helped him out a lot with that as well.
Yeah, Tim Ryan did tell Bernie you don't have to yell during one of the
debates. My God. That's such, I can't
remember
like,
that.
honestly, and now this like bloated idiot's like freaking out on the, the halls of Congress.
Yeah, you don't have to yell, Tim. Come on.
You know, about like how, about bipartisanship of all fucking things.
Like, yeah, they're just too conciliatory. I mean, like trying to appeal to them on like their love of cops. Well, like they're lying. Okay, they're lying. What do you want me to say? And I think that like sometimes when like we get to this point with people where it's like, okay, well, they're just not telling the truth, and you have to be an adult even when they're not. And like, and that might sound patronizing, but it's like they're just lying. Okay, like if someone's operating in bad faith, and I think this is another fallacy or like terrible tendency that have been taught to people by our media political culture, or political media culture rather, that like you have to enable the most bad faith arguments and ideas and whatever, much less being unable to identify them from anybody who submits them to you, because like that's just the only way to change hearts and minds. But you know, I'll tell you, some people are just dumbasses and liars, and you shouldn't waste your time with them. Like you should be able to determine who's like operating from a place that can be changed versus who's operating from a place that can't be changed, regardless of whether it's from good faith or bad faith. Some people just been watching too much Newsmax, and it's like, and it gave their brain boomeritis, and you can't deal with that. But like the whole like, don't you love the cops? Don't you believe in the sanctity of the law? And it's just like, no, obviously they don't. They're criminals. Like, who are you talking to? It's like it's like they almost believe that there's a silent majority out there. It's like, no, of course not. They're cheating. Like, duh, don't you know that? Don't you know how any of this works?
I really want to make this clear for folks, because we're in very much agreement on like the Democrat, like we're not lobbing these criticisms at the Democratic Party because we have hope that they're going to change. We're trying to criticize like an ideology that is not just ineffective, it's really dangerous. And I want to just lay out these arguments really quick about the Supreme Court for people who might just be listening to this who aren't familiar. We're saying that it's bad that Breyer is not going to resign because it allows the Republicans potentially to increase their power over a partisan organization that the Democrats and liberals continue to refuse to admit is a political organization. But beyond that, we don't want to have the Supreme Court because we don't want a body standing over democracy like this. All of the arguments that people make for why we need the Supreme Court are wrong. This idea that it protects us from the tyranny of the majority, right? As you know, oh, the Supreme Court's the one thing that's going to stand up for minority rights in the United States. Literally,
what they mean is rich people.
Yeah, the minority, the 1% a minority.
Exactly.
There's only one majority that they care about is corporations and rich people.
Yeah.
Literally any moment in American history where the U.S. government has done something, not just like typical American government evil, but just like straight up genocidal, the Supreme Court has stood with them, right? And even the kind of arguments that the main argument that people talk about is Roe v. Wade, right? And the right to abortion, right? Which obviously, is better than not having abortion available in the United States. But don't forget, Roe v. Wade didn't just happen out of nowhere. Roe v. Wade happened because there were mass movements and momentum all around this country to make sure that women had the right to an abortion, right? And what the Supreme Court functionally did was stamp out that activism and has always put the right to an abortion as like a kind of suspended threat that it can be taken away like that. And we're looking at a potential like that might happen, in this coming year with the Supreme Court, right? And for decades and decades and decades of a question that we thought was settled was always looming over our heads. And the groundwork that got it to that point initially, that created the conditions for Roe v. Wade, right? It does not exist with the same kind of fervor today, meaning that, if they do pull it back, we're going to have to rebuild all of those organizations, all of that momentum, right? And have to have this fight again instead of settling things once and for all, right? It's just like, you have to understand that like dealing with these big questions through the court is a dangerous strategy in general, because it always leaves them to another ruling. When what we should be saying is that there shouldn't be an institution that sits over democracy. It's funny to talk about. Remember when we were hoping that Bernie Sanders might be able to sneak through? We all knew exactly what a Bernie Sanders presidency was going to be like, even if he controlled the Democratic Party, which he wouldn't have, and had a majority in Congress. It was going to be a constant fight with the Supreme Court, which was going to try to strike down any kind of radical plan, from Medicare for All, a Green New Deal. Right? This is an institution that we have to be laying the groundwork to be in conflict with, because it is an organization that is set up to implement, a very strong iron fist of class war against working people and socialist left movements.
That's a good point, David. I'm actually surprised by what people think is functional, just generally speaking, when it comes to like a sustainable society in terms of like what people think like will lead to even the most probable, positive solution. And by that I mean like, I don't think you can live in a country where your civil rights are possibly rolled back every 4 years. That's like no other country lives like this. Like, the same way you can't live in a country with piecemeal gun laws. Like they don't work. We just have mass shootings all the time. And no other country has that either. Just like you can't live in a country with like scatter plot pandemic quarantine laws. We didn't do that either. We got 1 in 600, I'm sorry, no, like 1 in 450 or 1 in 500 Americans dead of COVID-19, the most in the whole world. Like I just think that people have been conditioned to think that this kind of like drowning feeling that they are feeling constantly is a homeostasis that's possible, or that anywhere else in the world is like this. It is not. Nowhere else in the world is like so precarious, but the precarity is the point. Like you're supposed to feel, especially the Supreme Court for the Democrats, maybe less so for the Republicans who use it as an actual tool to get their stuff through, like just operates as a way to like, warn you if you ever try to get any more than just like keeping the defense up, you'll lose everything. And like at a certain point, that's just not a feasible position to be in. And like the same with the whole like changing Democrats. I don't believe you can change Democrats. I think that's like I think that's a fallacy. I think that's what we were saying earlier when it comes down to like the mask mandate. That's a way to get you as the individual to try to like adopt all the responsibility of an institution that is like supposedly supposed to be doing something, because you know in your heart that they're not, and you know that no one you talk to cares. And that's just it. Like that's just it. Like people know Democrats don't give a shit, and they know in their heart that they won't help, and so they know they have to keep quiet about it, because if they told what they feel like are the rubes who vote for the Democrat, then they wouldn't vote for them. But there are no rubes who vote for Democrats like that, except for like the handful of people who read the New York Times. Everyone else is just being held hostage because the other people, because the Republican Party just functions as the gun to your head, while Democrats just function as the hostage taker. And that's like, I think it's just a flaw in people's analytical, instruction to view them as not necessarily separate parties, because they are separate parties, but to view them as like not part of the same system, part of the same sort of like codependent toxic system that like makes it impossible to extricate one from the other. You can't even imagine the Democratic Party existing without the Republicans. All they do is play defense. So what would they do? And so like, I focus more on changing people's minds, because, not to say Democrats aren't people, but like the moment, someone says that they have such a huge investment in the Democratic Party that their ego is tied up into like, whatever Nancy Pelosi is doing, I don't know what you can say to them, because like those people are scamming you,
Like, let me just like an example, like in Texas, right, or in South Carolina, like the places that I've lived, southern states where the Democratic Party is in the party in power. You have people who are like, okay, well, we have to support them and push them, because obviously the threat of like GOP government is absolutely damaging. And I agree completely that you need to do everything you can to weaken GOP power. But when it comes to the Democrat one, I think that's not the long-term solution, because I just don't find any kind of. I don't think that for example, for Texas to have better left-wing socialist policies, we need to go through some prolonged period of like Democratic Party rule. I think there has to be a break, but that's a whole other conversation. The point I want to make is like you start to wonder why you're even spending any energy trying to support an organization that one constantly shoots itself in the foot, and then in government doesn't not only acts as a doormat oftentimes to the Republican Party, but a friendly aider and abettor. Like an example of that is, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later in the show, Matt and I, but in the Texas House today, you'll love this. They had a pretty much bipartisan support for a bill that allows police departments to kill people with drones. Right? That's it, Democrat and Republicans supporting that, right? In the context of, Black Lives Matter protests, all these conversations about how we're thinking about policing, right? You don't even have people who have the backbone to say, hey, I don't think that we should empower maniacs in the police department
burp there.
to drop bombs on people.
No, I mean they do it already though. I mean they bombed Christopher Dorner that time with a drone when he was in California. I remember that in college.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a wild couple weeks. If the smile on my face is not wistful and happy, it's an embarrassed smile from burping live on air. Certainly not wistful and happy thinking about Christopher Dorner and his
Just on the Dorner story, I was watching the documentary on Netflix about the that girl who went missing at the hotel in downtown LA. I forget what that hotel was called, but anyway, she went missing and she ended up found in the water tank up top, and it was this big mystery. But the cops basically weren't able to adequately investigate that, including opening up the lid to look to see if there was somebody drowned inside, because they had their hands full with the Dorner shit.
Yeah, they were too busy shooting 3 9-year-old Dominican women driving around in like a different colored car out of fear. But I mean, not to interrupt you, David, but to your point, I think that you're right. I mean, I don't want to, maybe I'll contradict myself a little bit by saying like, I don't want to sort of come across as trying to convince people like to not try to work with Democrats, because that's not my point. I think more so people need to be fully aware of all the dimensions of the problem. And I think that there exists this layer of it where people feel a little bit afraid if they just admit the truth that, these people aren't trying to help you. They know the problem. Nancy Pelosi knows the problem. All people know the problem. They're just liars. And like that they fear that they're going to be speaking truth to that problem, speaking truth to just like that they're not ignorant, that they're not like being held at all sides by Republicans, that they're just, they just don't care, would be to empower Republicans. And so like it's on you to take on the burden of like keeping this secret from them. And all that honestly does is just like empower Republicans further, and more than even Republicans, it empowers like the far right further to come in, people like Trump, and say, you never hear how much Democrats just never help people. They never help the black community, never help whatever. And like, yeah, maybe people don't vote for him, but it's enough to suppress a few votes along with the other things Republicans are doing to suppress millions of votes around the country.
Absolutely. Well, Brandon Sutton, patreon.com/expand the discourse podcast. Check it out. At Pretty Bad Lefty. Also, anything else we need to plug, Brandon?
I mean, I don't really do much. I think it's easy for me to come across as being like, pro quarantine, because I don't like going outside except to like work out. But, I'm working on streaming. I keep trying to figure out how to get this thing going. I might play Baldur's Gate on stream. Yeah, the latency. I'm trying to figure out the latency issue but the latency won't matter for Baldur's Gate or like card games. So once I figure out the latency stuff, I'll play faster games. And then once I really figure out, I'll play Parappa the Rapper, and I'll really, I'll show people what it means to be an adequate rapper.
Do you have the Discourse Twitch set up?
There is a Discourse Twitch set up. My co-host John already does Twitch streams and plays video games, does interviews there as well. We had Marshall Steinbaum on recently to talk about certain things. We had Esha on recently from the Historically podcast to talk about the history of Stalin and other forms of like the whitewashing of, not whitewashing of Stalin, but whitewashing of American history to paint Russians and paint USSR in a more negative light than they deserve to be painted in. So yeah, we're doing a lot of stuff on there too. Hopefully to more stuff soon, because I've been getting into gaming, developing carpal tunnel. Like I have a little click when I do with my hands now. Oh wow, yeah. You doing controller gaming or keyboard? I don't game with a keyboard. I'm a child. I never grew up past this point. Oh yeah. I probably shouldn't show my hands on stream. I think people are perverts now, and they like that. I thought it was feet.
Is there really is there like a wiki feet for hands?
I don't know. I have really weird hands. People feel polarized about them. I think people feel like they're really big. Yeah.
Show hands. It's after 8.
Show hands. Show hands.
But Brandon, thank you so much. And,
I do have nice feet, though. I will say that.
Well, my feet. People should know, just as an incentive to sign up for our Patreon. I think David, did my feet appear briefly in the post game? I think my bare feet. Yeah, and I didn't know that happened. But anyway, with that note, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with the rest of the show, folks. And thank you once again, Brandon.
Oh, thank you for having me. I hope this wasn't too bad. Sorry for all of the live gaff. Now you know why I don't do live, folks. Except for all the time I do live, I guess. But yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, you're an old hat at it now. All right, see you, folks.
always like having Brandon on.
Brandon, he's one of the best in the business, I think, at this sort of issues.
I don't want to drag it out, but he's actually really fun to talk Dark Souls with.
Interesting. I see Dark Souls. I haven't climbed the Dark Souls mountain yet. I got Sekiro, which I hear is sort of similar in terms
it's so
of difficulty.
good. Sekiro is so good. Though I have, and I know people who are like real gamers out there are going to make fun of me for it, but I love Dark Souls. I've beaten all three, and I like that the games are hard. But there's one boss in Sekiro that is so difficult. Not just because like the fight itself is hard, but it's like a 30-minute fight, and I keep on dying like at the end, and I keep on losing steam with the game because it's like, you get really close to beating it, and then it's like, okay, now do I want to do this again for half an hour? And I always select no, which means I keep falling off, and like now I'm not as good as I used to be. So I don't know. I'm training to beat this
right.
The Guardian Monkey. If anyone plays the game,
you like lost track of his like sort of fight choreography and stuff.
Yeah, you have to like work on your your abilities to get your timing right and stuff. And I stopped playing it for like 4 months because I just got so fed up with the damn ape.
I got my experience, and it's not as hard of a game, I don't think, but God of War. I decided when the most recent one, I got it. I'm like, I'm gonna play this on the hardest difficulty and just get really good. And it was very satisfying, like going through the early levels when you have to be like really on top of your game. But then it gets to a point of difficulty where I just don't have that kind of time. Like I just can't. I'm not good enough. I've lost a step or something. But anyway, people think this is a post game, so let's set up.
No, and for the post game, we'll do that after. That's for patrons. And we're gonna be watching some Dave Rubin, maybe watching some an old Michael clip there too, and a couple other things. So definitely join us for that.
Let's turn our sights now. Well, I have a transition for this, if you allow me. What Henry Kissinger called a dagger pointed at the heart of Antarctica in a very condescending phrase back in the 70s. We have actually really, really good news out of Chile, and Kissinger hopefully isn't active enough to try to fuck it up. David, tell us what's going on.
Man, it's one of those moments, too, where you're just amazed he's still alive.
Yeah.
People, I think, are generally aware of the history in Chile, and that's where the phrase of the October 2019 uprising there of left-wing activists and the youth was neoliberalism was born here, it will die here. And there's some really exciting developments in that fight. I'll just remind people, Allende is thrown over in a violent coup, murdered, years and years and years of actual terror, and forced privatization that ends up being enshrined in the Constitution, sort of sets the stage for the post Pinochet era, where even though the country sort of nominally returns to democracy, there's so many things that are not able to be touched because so many of the the vile achievements of that authoritarian neoliberal regime were put into the Constitution.
The Constitution, we should say, consulted by people like, I think it was Milton Friedman, a lot of Chicago school people, James Buchanan, Virginia school, I guess. I
mean, extreme stuff too. I mean, we don't have time to go into all the parts of the Constitution, but this is a country like where water is privatized, right? Which is insane, right? This is like a free marketeers, like wet dream kind of a constitution. And it's been devastating for the people. But we have really, really good news. In the elections last weekend, the left won big time for the new constitutional convention. So there's going to be a constitutional convention, and they had an election for delegates along with mayoral races and also regional governor races. And the left movements won big time. You had movements, that included things like the Broad Front and the Communist Party, the I Approve Dignity ticket. They won around 28 members of the Constitutional Convention. The more traditional, like center-left coalition of the Socialist Party and the Christian Democrats got significant votes, but they were outflanked by the Communist Party, and also very notably La Lista del Pueblo, which won 27 delegates, which presented itself as the representatives of the 2019 uprising. So remember that, what this means is that this constitution can be rewritten, and a lot of much needed reforms can happen, from land to water rights, the pension system, the ending of the exploitation of natural resources, and also notably women's rights, indigenous rights, LGBTQ rights. I mean, this is a very, very historic moment. And I wanted to know just two things before we go through like the brief history. This was a huge victory, not just because of the left victories, but also because it was a systematic defeat of the right wing. So when the current when the right wing basically agreed to this vote on a new constitution, they wrote in that there needs to be a 2/3 majority to approve the Constitution. The hope there was that they could block anything that they didn't want in the Constitution, because they assumed that no matter what, they'd be able to have a coalition overthird the vote. That didn't happen. So not only did the left win big time, but the right parties only got essentially they only have about 20% of the vote for this constitutional convention, which means the opportunity for the left to create something very different is there. It's not a perfect situation, just because, as I was noting earlier, there's sort of like three camps of the left victory. So it means that there's going to have to be negotiations and squabbles, and they don't always agree on everything.
It's going to be fascinating to see what those disagreements are, I think.
No, for sure. But the point is that it's set up very, very favorably for the left, and I'm sure it's going to be a massive improvement on the current constitution. But I wanted to, if we can just do like a brief history here, just so folks are familiar. There was it's the second piece of sound, the subway protest, Matt.
Yep.
But this started in October 2019. We covered it a lot on TMBS, where, because of more and more privatization, because of more and more austerity, there was an increase to the subway fares, and people rose up, particularly students in the cities, against this increase in subway fares, and ran these really radical protests where they refused to pay the increased fare. Do we have it up? Or
Yep, it's up right now.
Yeah. And these were really incredible scenes. We actually played this on TMBS to compare. This is how you do solidarity versus what Extinction Rebellion was doing. You remember that?
Oh, God, yes.
When Extinction Rebellion was attacking people for going on the subway, they were actually showing how to invite people in to a left movement. This movement fundamentally changed the recent history of Chile. And sort of became an outpouring from just this to a massive left-wing movement, massive protests against the government, against the entire system. It quickly expanded from just being about the subway protests to being against neoliberalism, being against Pinochet's legacy in the country, and particularly being against a constitution that prevents people from having their democratic voice heard, because it prevents a lot of much needed reforms to happen. So we have the second piece of sound here. This is people celebrating back in October when a vote for a new constitution won in a landslide, to hold, convention for a new constitution won in a landslide. So this came out of, incredible amounts of organizing. There's parts of it that are very organic in the sense that like people are fed up, but these things don't just happen. Right. This kind of concentrated movement happened because of an incredible amount of hard work, a lot of people really understanding the political moment. And it's created this incredible rupture that is something that we have to celebrate, especially given, one, its importance, and two, much needed good news.
Yeah. Here.
So we'll see. I mean, it's really, really exciting. And, maybe we can have somebody on sometime soon to talk about this a little bit more in depth. But the kind of big takeaways from it is like, okay, one, left wins, there should be a new constitution, but also the success of these movements into creating a kind of new left formation. Even though the left parties, the traditional left parties and the representatives, are going to be represented in the convention, a lot of these formations are very, very new and are a kind of new left synthesis. And the story here was very much a rejection of the traditional parties, both on the left and the right, particularly with a mass punishment to the right wing. So a lot of encouraging signs coming out of Chile.
Yeah, I mean, South America in general seems to be really good with movements, but Chile, I mean, you see communists. Do you want to address the vote participation point that we were kind of talking about off air?
Yeah, I mean, so there's one of the kind of criticisms of the vote is that it actually was a very, low participation compared to other elections. But, I think it's one thing that's worth noting. But I think, one, the fact that this came out of such a movement of popular support, I think should, make people very aware that this isn't some kind of like secret parliamentarian, trick that people were able to pull. This came out of mass movements in the streets that fundamentally changed the history of the country.
Right.
And to understand that with the low votes for the right wing, it actually probably was a lot of people not voting who traditionally vote for the right wings as a kind of refusal and rejection of the current President Pinera. So I think that that's kind of like the general take and consensus on it.
Yeah.
But it definitely is an interesting thing to have such an overwhelming vote and turnout for the vote to hold a constitutional convention, and then to have lower turnout on a vote.
Yeah, well, it's like, why would you? I guess, like, logically, why would you expect popular turnout on behalf of a more reactionary constitution, right? Like, the American Constitution wasn't written publicly, like, and put to a plebiscite, right? Like, that shit was done and behind closed doors, and like, that was the famous Ben Franklin quote where it's like, what are you doing in there? It's like, well, we're trying to give you a republic if you can keep it. Well, it's like, what are you doing inside there though? Like, how much specifically, right? Like, so to me, that's not that surprising that you wouldn't get a whole bunch of people to, like property owners to come, because, like, how many of them could there be anyway? And how much can you propagandize people to go to elections that, like we mentioned, like the dynamic is like, these aren't the typical elections, these were special elections, right? So like that requires a political project to turn people out for. It's just like I mean, I guess the Brexit EU comparison is kind of similar, right? Like, people just weren't paying attention to those as much. But
also you can't discount COVID too.
Good point.
But yeah. I mean, it's definitely and it's an interesting question. But yeah, I think it's like an example that the left movements that are able to organize these protests were just much stronger at doing politics than the right was, and that's an important lesson, I think, for a lot of people to recognize going forward, that like having strong organization is just as important as like winning elections in general.
Yeah. And then what kind of actions you do like that. I mean, I remember that 2019, the subway protest, just as like so clear, like a great action, right? Like, you don't have to like go into theory about maybe actually this approach might work sometimes. It's like, no, this is great. But yeah, let's move on. Do you want to move on to Texas?
Yeah, we got to do this. How to frame it? I mean, Greg Abbott and his cronies and monsters here have put forward and signed into law a monstrous anti-abortion bill. And I know people have seen it. It's been big national news. It bans abortion after 6 weeks, which essentially is a virtual ban on abortion, because you'd only have to really be 2 weeks out from a missed period, to hit that deadline. And then, of course, it's not very easy in a lot of parts of the state to schedule an abortion appointment anyway. I mean, it's very much, set up to virtually ban abortion. And then another really disgusting, and as we were talking about with Brandon earlier, revealing moment of how Republicans understand power. The way that it's set up, the enforcement of it is really nasty, where instead of the state enforcing it, basically it allows private citizens to sue abortion providers, and I believe also women themselves who get an abortion past that deadline, which means that your nosy neighbor, your incredibly insane evangelical vigilante, is going to be not only encouraged but emboldened and relied upon by the state, deputized essentially, to go back to another horrible tradition, to abuse women, to abuse abortion providers. And it's a sneaky legal move, because it makes it harder for abortion clinics and pro-choice organizations to sue, because you can't sue the attorney general because he is not the one bringing the suits against people, right? It just is meant, it's a very sneaky way to try to get around any kind of legal protections or legal battle around this. So this won't go into effect until September. And notably, the Supreme Court is going to be hearing another case on, I believe, Mississippi's abortion law before then. Which a lot of people are worried with the new majority could actually overturn Roe v. Wade. It's one of the, I want to make a couple points about the Texas legislature because unfortunately this is not the only horrible thing that's happened this week. But I want to say on this issue, there's no doubt about it. This is a war on women, and it's particularly a war on poor and working people. There's no doubts about it. The fight to control people's rights over their own body is not just, an evangelical Christian crusade, but it's also an attempt to discipline and to control people in the nastiest way. It's evil, and it absolutely needs to be confronted. And I know people are already, laying the groundwork to fight against this. But it just, as we were saying with Brandon, all of these things have just been suspended for so long that it's only a matter of time. And we're seeing this across the South now and across the country with GOP places with GOP majorities that they really are finally coalescing on like a very, very strong push to overturn basic fundamental human rights. It's a reminder that this isn't a game. And I think obviously we should direct most of our anger on this one towards the GOP. But in states like Texas, I think where the Democratic Party completely bungled the most recent elections, we should also remind people that these things, these fights, these political fights are very, very important. And for fuck's sake, we can't leave the opposition's hands in the Democratic Party, which is constantly showing that it's going to fail time and time again.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say on that besides, I imagine Texas is a lot like North Dakota, which is that these providers are few and far between. I think North Dakota only has a single clinic in the entire state, and that it's constantly harassed by these type of people who would love to be able to sue a woman for going in there and terminating a pregnancy she didn't want. And yeah, it's I don't know. It's very gross.
Yeah, it's absolutely gross. And I want to add some more stuff, just sort of rapid fire, because for people who aren't familiar, Texas legislature is like extremely limited in the amount of time that it meets. So they're pushing through a lot of stuff right now. It's a really important political time when there's a lot that needs to get done. And you have stuff like this, which is, nasty, war on women and war on working people. But also just like a lot of crap. We have the critical race theory nonsense that's going through, another bill trying to push to force like any sports team to play the national anthem. A lot of crap and red meat for their base. But I wanted to note that one, Texas has now joined 21 other states in rejecting extensions on unemployment benefits for people affected by COVID. This is not just a Texas problem. This is a problem of the GOP across the country. And it's one, they do this because they are the hammer of pro-business and anti-worker statutes, oftentimes, aided very happily by the Democratic Party. But I also wanted to point out that this is exactly what happens when you have an American media that for the past month has been telling this nonsense story about a worker shortage, which everybody knows the line at this point, it fundamentally is a wage shortage, right? But when you start to let that percolate in the media, right? And it's an ideological battle there because you start convincing even working people that this is a problem, right? People who just follow the news casually, like, oh, this is a problem. We can't get anyone to work, right?
Yeah, people see it in the news and then they drive up to one drive-through that has the sign that says, sorry, we can't get workers. And then all of a sudden you create this impression like, oh, the government's actually being, I mean, theoretically, the government's being too generous to people and they're coerced to work, basically.
Yeah, you're coerced to work. Yeah, it's exactly. It's trying to break and discipline labor. So screw all the media organizations that were just unthinkingly eating up pro-business propaganda over the past few weeks. I mean, this is a victory here for really, really nasty, organizations like the Chamber of Commerce that has been waging a war on these very, very meager benefits in the first place. People have been making the note that on top of, as Abbott is doing that, Texas is also extending Chapter 313, which gives corporations huge property tax breaks, including that jackass Elon Musk, who doesn't give a shit about Texas, by the way, other than a place that he thinks that you guys are rubes and you will give him millions of dollars to do whatever he wants, right? So you're not attracting innovation to this state. You're attracting exploiters like Musk. So we have that crap, and then we're not really going to get anything done on the power grid after the snowstorm, right?
Which, how many people died? Like, do we have like
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's devastating. But we also have that, and pushes to ban cities' ability to block, to renegotiate or reimagine their power grids so that they're not so reliant on natural gas. I just wanted to, if you can, pull this tweet up at the Dr. Buckingham tweet, because this is another example of what I mean when I talk about the Democratic Party. This is 28-3 in the Senate, which means you got Democrats standing with Republicans on this to ban homeless camping across the state of Texas. So this is, the big fight in Austin over Prop B. This is now a statewide ban on this. And this is just an interesting thing here. And I just think it's so cynical and disgusting. It needs to be noted that in this tweet, the author of this horrible anti-human bill uses like the PC language around, homeless folk, saying, what is it? Those experiencing homelessness. And I just think that that's just so disgusting and cynical to be like, oh, I'm going to use the correct framing about this while I'm actively harming people. Another really nasty thing that we talked about with Brandon a second ago is that they're going to allow, in the House, they voted to allow police to use drones, allow drone strikes against people, right? In the backdrop of, Black Lives Matter and all these conversations about police abuse, giving the police another weapon, and literally at this point, a weapon of war.
There's got to be, if some Texas-based journalists can look into, there's got to be some money behind that, right? The unanimity, like some drone manufacturer, because that's Texas police departments are going to get drones. Like, that's big contracts and training and shit like that. Like, I'd be curious, but I mean, who knows? Our political class is dumb enough to, I guess, okay that anyway. But it seems like that seems like a lot of money. Also,
people are afraid, especially Democrats, of seeming like they're anti-police because they're cowards and they have no backbone and they don't recognize what's happening with social and political movements, right? And they think that they're just going to get voters because the Republicans are so horrifying without giving people anything to vote for, right? The story of 2020, again, I always have to note this so people don't mistake this. Biden still won, huge majorities with, the Black and Hispanic population here, but Trump ate into those big time, which means that a lot of people, again, it's not the shift. We're not talking about 50-50. We're talking about moving from like 90 to 75%, support in these communities for the Democratic Party. But these are stories that are very, very notable. So despite all the horrible shit that Trump was doing, the fact that the Democratic Party in this state was unable to, maintain their majorities there is an example of a party that is just completely out of touch and has no real roots with its base and is so drunk on this ideology that they just, because of divine providence, are going to maintain voters with people, maintain votes and support from communities of color in the United States. It's something that just needs to be challenged left and right, because this has severe consequences, this kind of stupid political strategy and lack of coherent platforms. It has extremely damaging consequences. But the last point, and I'm curious what you think about this one, I think you probably agree with me, is look, whatever kind of rhetoric you feel like is helpful to get the points across about how bad all this stuff that's happening is, I think use it. I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, don't make this kind of argument. But I just want to say, as like a political point, as a theoretical point, that saying that, oh, how insane is it that Abbott is blocking welfare programs for workers while giving corporations huge amounts of money. Oh, isn't this hypocrisy? Or what happened to like the logic of small government when the Texas legislature and all of these Republicans are essentially blocking local governments from doing what they want or voting on their own measures, right? They don't care. Because conservatism is not a coherent ideology. Conservatism is an excuse to be the hammer of pro-business, anti-working class, and extremely reactionary social groups, to be their warrior. Conservatism is the excuse that you give to the public to try to make it seem like you don't just straight up have blood on your hands, that you're not just running on destroying people's lives and their livelihoods, right? We need to understand as the left, right, as socialists, that this is not an ideology that you can really pick apart, right, theoretically, because it's not it's not like a functional theoretical view of the world. It's a lie that's being sold to a lot of people, and it gets popular when you have an absence of popular movements that show people that we're going to fight for working people, we're going to fight for you and fight for your communities. Of course, what's going to fill up that empty space is a bunch of nonsense and people holding on to some of the more reactionary positions, like being, against abortion and things like that, right? If you don't give people something else, right, you leave a huge hole and an opportunity for our opponents to weave completely incoherent narratives, but narratives that might convince somebody to show up and vote for them, right? And, we just need to understand that conservatism is not a coherent ideology as socialists, and the Democratic Party sure as hell is not going to save us. And understand that we can't just sit these fights out because they're very, very critical and they affect a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, basically the conservatives, like you said, the hammer, or like absolutely labor needs to be coerced, and the Democrats are basically, well, we agree about that, but we're going to try to do it with, instead, it's the carrot versus the stick, right?
Yeah,
basically, right? The Democrats are the carrot, Republicans are the stick, and try to get them both working if people are going to take your drive-through order.
And like, sorry. And I think, we sort of said all we need to say about this, but just like a little bit of free political advice to Biden and the Democratic Party as a whole. As the Republicans wage war on these unemployment benefits, why don't you make the point that most people actually like getting a little bit of extra money when they need it, right? And own that stuff, instead of, what did we get from Biden when this kind of story came out about the unemployment benefits? Was walking back and basically accepting all of the right-wing talking points and trying to make excuses about how it's not fitting reality, instead of saying, no, I'm somebody who is very happy to be putting money in Americans' pockets when they need it, right? The inability of the Democrats to do that kind of positive politics only allows the Republicans to be able to push whatever kind of nonsense narrative that they want. And again, Biden's not going to do that because Biden doesn't want functionally to stand for that kind of material shift in people's politics. But it's just an example that the political calculus is actually very, very simple, and the fact that the Democratic Party doesn't do it is absolute travesty and harms working people across the board.
Yeah, and it gives Republicans things to run on. I mean, not that like any of the Republicans that are fainting as class traitors somehow have stepped up in any way on this moment. They're all in support of beating people back into the workplace.
Howley and
it's and Biden having Psaki go out and say, though this was only supposed to be for COVID, and we're going to work with governors. It's like, no, we should be like, I dream of a time where like a fucking Democrat says, that all those articles that came out about how people don't only have $400 or barely even $400 for an emergency. That's no longer a thing anymore. That's not even a thing. That everyone has thousands of dollars that they're sitting on, and absolutely the shit would fall apart in this country. I think it requires I think there are a certain amount of these service industry jobs that have been exploiting people who are absolutely need that shit, and if they don't need that shit, it's going to be hard to get people to come service you like that.
Dude, I mean, it's like, remember when there was all this hand-wringing about Trump wanting to sign the first stimulus checks, right? And people don't realize that that was a very, very astute move by Trump. When you interviewed people in a lot of like the recaps of the election, why was Trump able to win support from kind of, working class communities of color? One of the number one reasons was that guy sent me money and I needed some money, right? And instead of like what the Democrats did is they freaked out. It was like, oh my God, he can't do that. He can't do that. And then come into power. And then instead of saying like, oh, we're going to own all of the positive benefits of this program, and we're going to extend the benefits to $2,000, which they failed to do. You get all this kind of hand wringing. Look, they might have implemented the extension on the payments, under Trump, but say that you're the one who actually like really supports it or the reason it's still existing for people. Own it and win on it. And they don't do that nationally, and they sure as hell don't do that statewide here, which is a disaster.
Yeah, I'm looking for, but I got the letter from Joe, because he did send a letter saying, taking credit for it, but the letter was like, it like did the math for you, saying like, so in addition to the $600 you got in December, this completes my promise. Like, that's not like, if you're having to explain that shit, that's not a victory lap, man. It should have been like, we actually exceeded the promise and we gave you $2,600 when we could have only done this cheap ass thing that gave you $1,400, but here's an extra $600 that right, they could have easily done that, and instead they didn't, because again, they are concerned about the business owners that are saying like, I can't get a dishwasher to come take the same fucking wage that they were taking a year and a half ago, to come and like, or even like retail employees, like the mask thing. Like it's infinitely more objectionable to me for a person to come into a retail establishment and ask the worker why they're wearing a mask than why they aren't. But either one of those scenarios is that worker having to put up with extra shit like that they probably don't want to. Because as a person who worked at Old Navy, I can't imagine how much of a fucking disaster it would be to work Old Navy when this mask stuff is in flux, right? And I don't really know where I'm going with this, but exasperating.
Yeah, it is. It's exasperating and exhausting. Well, as a little antidote, Matt and I in the postgame will be watching some very, very fresh and beautiful Dave Rubin, along with a couple other stories, hang out and also take questions from the Discord.
Fresh and beautiful Dave Rubin sounds like easy breezy, beautiful cover girl.
Join us over there at patreon.com/leftreckoning in a little bit. How long, Matt?
Probably about a half hour.
Cool. See y'all then.
See you, folks.